Okay, looks like we're ready to get started. Now, I don't have the book in front of me, but I am suspicious that this is chapter 6 of Igong, the Definitive Practice, because I saw the slides for the next week, and I think that, or not the slides, but the topic, and I think that's chapter 7. Hey, I'm right. That's good. All right, so first of all, this is a three-part series. So there's three different presentations that all align to this chapter in the book and the topics that we're going to discuss. So the first topic, I don't know if it's the name of the chapter, but it sounds awfully familiar. But the biophysics of burnout. That's a good topic. So, I think one of the important things to look at is we often talk about things in one way or the other. So when we talk about burnout, it's typically discussed as if it's just like this ethereal, imaginary thing. It's like, oh, it's just mental, it's just in your mind. Well, I mean, yes, but the brain is a physical apparatus, right? So there's a biological mechanism to the brain. So then thinking and the things that we do must also have a biochemical, biological element to it. It just makes sense, but we don't really talk about it that way, when we're we need a mental health day, because we're overwhelmed. Very rarely do we see that in its totality, which is mind, body, and spirit are all being affected at once. So this is kind of a reminder, this presentation is a reminder that burnout, which is something that we talk about often, and I'm finishing up my doctorate, and it's something that is talked about as you get towards the end of your doctoral program, is that students are typically burnt out. Sometimes students don't go on to their profession right away because they're not in the headspace to do so, which I don't think I'm there. Like I don't think I'm super burnt out, but I can completely understand and I've seen it. But the important thing to keep in mind and kind of what we're hoping to tie in and focus on is that this is a physical thing that's happening, this burnout. It's not just in our mind. So I know that everybody listening to this at some point has woken up. You wake up in the morning, it's your usual time, you got the usual amount of sleep, you didn't do anything abnormal, you weren't up partying or anything last night, and you're still tired. You wake up and you still feel heavy, you still feel lethargic. I have some coffee, but to be honest, I just like the taste. I don't usually, personally, not always, I don't usually wake up tired, but I have. And I will again, just because that's the nature of the species, it's just the nature of being alive in the world today. I'm going to have something that requires a lot of cognitive focus, a lot of mental energy. And that mental energy that I'm using is a physical thing as much as it is a mental thing, because really there's no difference between those two things. Now, I have an entire book that I'm writing. It's a separate manuscript that talks about this idea of habit and this idea that we view ourselves a certain way when what's actually happening is a biological mechanism that, to some extent, once the cascade is begun, is beyond our direct ability to influence. So what I mean is that the the neurological aftermath of using your mind, and we talked about how the task switching and constantly going from one thing to another and the mind just being completely scattered, and we'll get more into it, but we talk about the default mode network and how the human being tends to default towards worrying about the future and reminiscing and feeling a certain way about the past. But then we get these titles, And the book that I'm writing is about energy economics, and that a lot of the time the thing that's going on with us just has to do literally just with the conservation of energy. Where are we leaking energy and where are we conserving energy? Or are we doing either of those two things with any volition and will? So that's kind of the message, is that no, I actually don't think lazy is a thing. I just think that a person is very low on energy. I've noticed that when I don't want to do something, it's not usually just because, I don't wanna. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes it's, if I don't want to do something, it's because I just don't have the energy. Maybe I've just done so much that day, or I've been a little bit wasteful with where I put my mind and where I put my energy and the things that I do. And then so by the time I get to the point where I need to do something, I'm like, bah, I just don't have the juice. I don't have what I need. So physical exhaustion, it is pretty easy to see. Someone comes home, they've worked 12 hours, they've been on their feet, and they're just you see it in their whole body, their mind, their body, their energy is just dilapidated, and it looks like it's uh breaking down, in a manner of speaking. See, now mental fatigue, it's a little bit more difficult to see unless you're a trained eye. I think that I would I you know training in Chinese medicine, we're very astute about physical signs and symptoms. So I would be able to see the mental fatigue just as much as I would be able to see the physical fatigue because I'm trained to look at that. But typically it's more silent, it's more hidden, it's more tucked away. It's not as easy because it's not as on the surface to notice, but there's still a form of breakdown. There's still a form of degrade that's happening, and that degrade is actually very physical. It's not just me using fancy words because it seems like it would impress you. No, the degrade is a real thing that's happening, and we'll talk about that. Now I've mentioned this before, but and it just goes worth mentioning again that of our caloric intake in a day, the brain itself is going to use more than 20% of our total energy. So even though the brain doesn't have a lot of weight, it doesn't have a lot of physical mass, it's using most of our energy. 20% is a huge chunk of your daily metabolic production to be going, towards the faculties of the brain. So the energy currency, what we're actually talking about in terms of energy, metabolic energy is ATP. And that ATP is created in mitochondria, and it is the fuel, the chemical fuel of the human being. Well, if you're going all day and from the time this is a common occurrence, but some people, the moment they wake up, whether it's a verbal internal monologue or it's visualizing or in other non-symbolic ways of cognition, they're going into past and future, but they just launch immediately into it. It's my eyes are open and now I'm just going to start worrying about shit. And that's a common thing. I'm not talking about rare events, things that are statistical anomalies in the human species. These are things that are happening commonly to people. So they wake up and you just go your whole day and you're running on high energy, a high performance engine at redline, and it's just going nonstop from the time that you wake up, from the time that you go to bed. And I'm willing to say that we used more than 20% of our body's energy for the day. And probably not that efficiently. And there's ways, we'll talk about this more as we go along, but there's ways throughout your day to interrupt that, to make sure that you're able to take a break, take a pause, downshift the trajectory of your energy and your mind and that constant go, 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 go. And as a student, definitely, I know all about this because the tendency for me would be to wake up and start thinking about what I need to memorize and then just memorizing it all day. But no, I gotta clear the space. I gotta make sure that there's times, many times throughout the day where I just come back to this point zero where I'm neither here nor there. I'm just like a neuron. I am full of potential energy, ready to do the damn thing, but I'm not really doing it yet. I'm just hanging out. That's the resting state of the neuron. I like to imitate that. Almost hit the leave button, not the share button. Okay. So let's see. Did we talk about all that? Yeah. Red line, wake, sleep. Yep. Talk about all that. So I have to say that the picture that Shana put together here, that is just the most remarkably clean engine I've ever seen. Like you could eat off of that engine. It is so clean and pretty. So that's not going to be the example of our engine breaking down. That picture is the example of the engine the day that you're born. Your brain looks like that, maybe. I don't know. Now, the metaphor that I decided to use, and I had to get a little bit of help on this one, was the combustion engine because I had different ideas in mind, but they relate too much to Chinese medicine. So when we start talking about cooking rice and the pressure and the steam, that's often the way that qi is described. So I wanted to do something maybe a little bit more appropriate for the audience. So I used a combustible engine, but it's the same thing. So you're imagine, you wake up and you just immediately jump in your car and assuming that you're not in a closed garage space, let's just say you rev the engine for 12 hours, assuming that you had the fuel for that, which you probably don't, but let's just assume that you had enough fuel in the car to sit there and just rev the engine for 12 hours. What's going to happen? It gets hot, right? So running the engine constantly creates heat. And I'm fighting the desire to talk about this in Chinese medical terms because that's something that we're very involved in is temperature. So we're always looking at the temperature of the body. And the mind, when it's just nonstop, is generating a type of internal pressure, and pressure creates heat. And in this analogy, you would use coolant in your engine, but taking a time to yourself to relax, doing some breath work or some qigong work, or just taking a moment to look at the trees and the clouds and just allowing things to settle a little bit and create some space in your mind is like coolant in that system. It will help relieve the pressure. And if you relieve some of that pressure, then you can relieve some of that heat. So what the modern human being is doing though is that not only are they wake up and they start revving their engine from the time that they wake up, from the time that they go to bed, they've been doing it every day for years, maybe decades at a certain point. So you think about we were doing a case study on a stockbroker and he was very high energy. He had a million things to do and a million places to be, and he was just go, 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 go. And year after year after year, guess what? It just accumulated until system failure, because it can only go on for so long. The heat and the pressure and the system will eventually break down. And then in the analogy that we used with the engine, the gasket fails. Eventually the machinery seizes because it's never really had time to cool down. And that's the perfect analogy for the brain. The brain operates in a similar way. If we never give it time to cool down, it's just going to continue to accumulate heat. It's going to continue to accumulate pressure. And there's going to come a time where the balance of forces says, hey, we're out of juice, we're out of energy, we have too much heat, and the engine won't look super clean like that anymore, right? That's when you look at that 40 or 50-year-old engine that's got like 200,000 miles on it, old, dusty, and greasy. Well, though, if you went 200,000 miles, that's a good long life. So there's a couple ways to look at that. All right, let's see what we have on our PowerPoint here. I think that might be it. Aha. Oh, that is such a cute dog. How can I talk about anything with a cute dog on the screen like that? Okay, I'm done. I have nothing left to say. So we're going to do another video, and again, I have an entire book that I'm writing on the dynamics of changing habit, changing behavior, but through the lens of Chinese medicine, but also through the lens of energy conservation. And so this kind of fits into that because oftentimes when we're exhausted, when we don't have the metabolic energy for certain things, people may view that a certain way. And we're going to talk about that in the next video, that it's actually that's a complete fallacy. It's illogical. It's not true. You know, the person isn't lazy. The person isn't a bad person just because they're overdoing it and they're not managing their energy in a way that is efficient. So I hope you like this video, and we have another video coming up called the character flaw fallacy. I invite you to watch that. And just keep in mind that this is all coming from a book that will be available very soon. I get my copy and then I got to read it and make sure it is all good to go. And then I can put it in the hands of the people. Um, so if you like reading, please check that out as well. All right. Thanks a lot.